She came up to New England to do her undergrad work at Middlebury College. After that, she took a little hiatus from formal academia and worked with Harvard Forest for a number of years, and is currently in the Richardson Lab here at Harvard. Tonight, Meghan Blumstein is going to be speaking on preserving plants in the faces of pests, lessons learned in Cornwall and Devon.
Thank you for that introduction. So I have this book that they gave to me at the end of my fellowship that I'm going to put here, but you guys are welcome to look at it afterwards. It's basically beautiful pictures of English gardens, which are always lovely. So as you said, my name is Meghan Blumstein. I'm a graduate student in Organismic and Evolutionary Biology in Andrew Richardson Lab over in the herbarium. And we generally study how forests respond to climate change, plant ecophysiology, so how do forests allocate carbon within their, or how do trees allocate carbon within their tissues. But that's not really what I'm going to be talking about tonight, but it is somewhat related, and I can kind of get back to that link at the end. But I wanted to talk tonight about some work that I did prior to starting my PhD. I was the Damaris Boren Prize Fellow with the National Trust in 2012, and I worked with the National Trust on improving biosecurity in their gardens, which I'll explain what that means too in a little bit. But I earned the fellowship from the Royal Oak Foundation, which is an American organization that really likes the British National Trust and wants to raise money for the British National Trust, so they're in partnership. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my work and then some parallel issues. So what lessons can we take from the National Trust and their battle with invasive pests and disease from their garden and apply them in the United States. So just a little bit about the National Trust. It began in 1895. It is a nonprofit land conservation organization as well as a historical preservation organization. So it's kind of like if our Historical Preservation Society had like a baby with the land trust. They do. It was started in 1895 by Octavia Hill, Sir Robert Hunter, and Hardwick Ransley as an organization with a commitment to preserving places with historic interests and natural beauty. So they have a very broad scope, which means that they have own a lot of land in the United Kingdom and actually have a very big influence on what happens with conservation in landscapes in the United Kingdom. So the Trust owns over 20% of the coastline in England and Wales. So here you can see Burling Gap, which is in the southeast of England, and Kynance Cove, which is out in, about as far southwest as you can go. This presentation is also a little bit of an excuse for me to show all my photos from the UK. They own over 300 estates. So here's Colton Fishacre, which is the Doyley Cart family of Gilbert and Sullivan fame. And then over 400 gardens and landscapes and deer parks. So this was really what the focus of my research was on. We're working on the National Trust. So this is a hedge from Montacute, which is one of the many gardens in the National Trust. And a fun fact about this hedge is it gets pruned weekly, and it takes one gardener pretty much 2 days with a pair of hand pruners to do the whole thing. It's a lot of work. So again, I was based out in Cornwall, which is kind of this region of England right here. So you can see it's all the way down in the southwest. So this is the Devons up here. This is Cornwall down here. And I lived in Penzance, right outside of Penzance, which is about as far southwest as you can go in the United Kingdom. And I traveled throughout the whole southwest region for my work and visited a lot of different gardens to kind of talk to them about issues that they were having and whatnot. But to give you a little bit of background of why I was in Penzance and kind of what the draw of Cornwall and Cornish gardens is in general, here are some photos of Penzance that I took. And they kind of begin to tell the story of why Cornwall. Given its location, Penzance is a port city. It's right on the ocean. So a lot of things are coming in and out of Penzance. And it's also on the Gulf Stream, which is that really nice, lovely bit of warm water that comes up from the Gulf of Mexico and across the Atlantic Ocean. And because it's situated right on the Gulf Stream, it has a very stable climate. It never really freezes. It never really goes above 80. So it's pretty nice year-round. And because of that, and there's also copious amounts of rainfall. So it pretty much rains every day in Cornwall. It's very wet, it's very humid, and it has a very stable, mild climate. As a result, things grow pretty much year-round. I took this picture in mid-November, so you can see that plants are still flourishing, there's still plenty of life, and plants pretty much grow year-round, which is pretty crazy. And so these, and then you can see that you can pretty much also grow anything in Cornwall. You can grow, and this is just like random streets that I saw. You can grow things that are Mediterranean, from South Africa, from North America, from Asia, Australia. Pretty much a wide variety of plants will really thrive here because of the environmental conditions. So it's great, plants thrive here. It's a really great environment for plants, but it also means it's a really wonderful environment for pests and disease. Pathogens thrive here, fungi thrive here, insects thrive here. There's no freeze thaws to like kill back insects or fungi. There's really nothing to kind of check their spread. So once invasive pests and disease come in, as they often do through trade and other things like that, it kind of spreads unchecked, and it's a difficult to control in such an ideal environment for them. And Cornwall really is a gardener's paradise. Cornwall is known for their valley gardens. So again, here's a couple of examples of beautiful English gardens. But the valley gardens are interesting because they really utilize microclimate to be able to grow things from all around the world. So up at the top of the garden, you kind of have more sloped growing areas with rockier soils and less wet than lower areas. So you can grow all these temperate species, more North American temperate species, European temperate species. And then as you move down in valley gardens, the temperature gets a little bit warmer, it's more stable, it's a lot more wet and humid, so you can actually grow things that are almost tropical. You can find plants from Vietnam, Cambodia, things of that nature. And so here's another example from Colton Fisher, which was my favorite garden by far. It was amazing. But you can see they have eucalyptus trees growing up at the top of the garden. They have all these other temperate deciduous species. And then you move down to the bottom valley garden, you have all of these more tropical species. And interestingly enough, this is an interesting aside, but this is a tree fern, which is like the New Zealand's big symbolic plant. It's their, the All Blacks, which is their rugby team, that's their symbol. So tree ferns you can find tree ferns all over Cornwall because they used to be used as ballast in ships. So Cornish goods would be shipped to New Zealand, and once they got to New Zealand, they unloaded their boats, and then they needed to balance the hull, so they would fill the hull with these all these logs of tree ferns, and when they brought them back to Cornwall, they would just dump them on the ground. But they can absorb water and nutrients through their trunks. They can resprout really readily, and so they would dump these logs on the ground, and all of a sudden they would have tree ferns everywhere. But that's kind of an example of how easy it is to pass live organisms between borders and create problems in the future. So I worked with this lovely gentleman, Ian Wright, right here. It's amazing. So Ian Wright is a garden consultant for the Southwest region of the National Trust and the head plant advisor to the National Trust. He was formerly the head gardener at Trengwayton, and here's a picture from Trengwayton, which was famous for its rhododendron collection. So he was originally a head gardener at Trengwayton, was very famous for its rhododendron collection. So you can see here the azaleas and rhododendrons are in full bloom. It's a beautiful garden. And for centuries, the former owners of Trengwayton Garden, which has now been donated to the trust, would bring in rhododendrons from all over the world, and would also hybridize rhododendrons to create unique hybrids that are only found in this garden. So they're pretty famous for the rhododendrons. If you walk into the gardener's office up at the top of the hill, you look up and there's all of these little paper cards taped to the ceiling, and you look up and you realize that they're all RHS garden prizes for winning, like prize-winning rhododendrons. So they have a very proud history of their rhododendron collection. And unfortunately, this is how Ian kind of became the head plant advisor for the National Trust, is that in 2002, he noticed that some of his rhododendrons had this brown coloration starting on the outside of their leaves and moving inwards, and leaves started to droop, and then some of the prize rhododendrons actually died. So he had no idea what was going on, wasn't really sure what was happening. It wasn't any native pathogen or pest that he had ever dealt with. And so after going through a series of calls and consultations, he finally figured out that he had Phytophthora remorum in his garden, which I will refer to as P. remorum from now on. Phytophthora is really hard to say. Here we call Phytophthora remorum is sudden oak death, so it's what's causing a lot of oak decline in the western United States and California. There's like a broad dieback that you can see in tan oaks in California. And it's killing woody species. It can, Phytophthora remorum can infect over 100 plant species to varying degrees. Some of them it will kill, some of them kind of can persist as hosts for a long time. Phytophthora literally means plant destroyer, so it's aptly named. And there's hundreds of species in this genus, but this particular one is very problematic in that it attacks azaleas, camellias, rhododendrons, and other prize plants in Cornish gardens. So this is a big problem. It came from Asia, they think. It has now been introduced into the UK, and it's Ian kind of, and that's how Ian had kind of got into this plant health advisory role. But Phytophthora remorum is not the only pest disease that infects Cornish gardens or gardens in the UK in general. Ash dieback actually arrived in the country while I was there. There's a lot of panicked phone calls because they had known that it was coming through mainland Europe and were very concerned about it. Ash dieback has resulted in an 80% decline in ash in Denmark and a lot of continental Europe. Is now in the UK, which is very unfortunate. We have emerald ash borer here, which is our equivalent pest, which is awful. Dutch elm's disease you can see there, which we also have here. Box blight, which is threatening the iconic hedges of Cornwall. And honey fungus, which is actually a native pest, but it's very, they think it might actually be getting worse with climate change and changes in moving plant material around a lot more nowadays. So I'm going to kind of walk through some examples. So basically, my role in this fellowship was to go to the UK and kind of start off by getting a sense of like, how much do gardeners actually know about plant pest and disease? What do they know about plant pest and disease? What are they doing to prevent them from entering their gardens? Once they've entered their gardens, what do they do about it? And kind of like, what are their concerns right now? So Ian, again, had found this in 2002. He hadn't even considered pest and disease as an issue prior to that, and now it's all he thinks about. So why is it that gardeners aren't currently thinking about these things, and what are the best ways maybe to tap into their, what are the best ways to reach them and make them understand that this is important and also help them? So what resources do they use? How do they think? How often are they in the office in front of their computer? Like how often are they out in the garden? And what kind of tools would help them better secure their gardens against pests and disease? So the first example is from Lane Hydrock, and you can kind of see instantaneously what is wrong. So Lane Hydrock is famous because they have this beautiful walls of camellias over all of their walls. And you can already see that the camellias are beginning to die back from Phytophthora remorum. So Lane Hydrock is fairly close to Tringwayton and has also found a P. remorum in their gardens in 2002. And so they believe that the fungus entered in on nursery trade plants. So they were buying in plants to plant out in the garden. They think that one of the plants might have been infected. And then it spread through ponticum. So rhododendron ponticum kind of grows densely in these bushes and clumps around the edges of the property in kind of a wild way. And so these hedgerows of ponticum can be found throughout the UK, and they basically acted as a disease roadway. So because they grow densely, because they are a host species, the pure worm was able to infect the first plant and then kind of like a domino effect make its way throughout the entire garden, which is really unfortunate. So in talking to Tommy, who was the head gardener there, I said, you know, before this happened, like, what do you wish you had done? What did you wish you had known? What do you wish you had done? And what kind of lessons can we learn from this unfortunate introduction of pure worm? And he said the first thing he wished he had done was quarantine every plant that he bought in. When you buy in a plant, it may look healthy, but it can take up several weeks to show any signs of disease. So a big part of what he does now is any plants that come in, he has a greenhouse that's not even on the property. They go right into that greenhouse, and they're monitored for several weeks before they're even considered to be planted out for the garden. I asked him what he does now to kind of prevent the spread within his garden, because it's there, so like, now what do you do with it? Anything that gets infected now, he rips it out, burns it immediately, no question. I think he said another thing that he regretted doing is kind of letting it fester. You know, it's so hard because you know, we're all attached to these plants. We planted them, we reared them for sometimes years and years, and it's hard to give up on it so quickly, but there really is no treatment. It's not like a person that you can give antibiotics and we're going to be better. So he said he had wished he had just ripped out the infected plants, because then it just spreads and there's not a whole lot you can do once it starts spreading. So now whenever a plant gets infected, he immediately contains the infection, burns the plant, packages it up, gets it out of there really quickly. So another example comes from Knightsay's, which is a Victorian manor built in a Gothic style. It's kind of like a very magical, whimsical place. The guy here originally owned this estate, was very eccentric. So a lot of these eccentricities are kind of, the trust tries to preserve them in the modern property. So there's a lot of wicker artwork that an artist has come in to do, and the hedgerow has been a dog and fox hunt scene for several years, which is very interesting. But part of his, he was also a very forward-thinking man. So in the early 1900s, he planted a large Japanese larch woodlot. So Japanese larch is a big timber species for the UK. They use it for all sorts of things, for timber, pulp, paper, what have you. And so he planted out these huge Japanese larch lots in an effort to try to make a closed system. So he wanted to grow all of the wood that he used on property. He wanted to grow all the food that he ate on the property, hunt all the deer on his parkland and eat them. And so he tried to create this sustainable system. Anyways, so he had these large Japanese woodlots. And every year, Knightsay's, or not every year, but consistently Knightsay's would have an outside contractor come in and manage the woodlots, because they really just don't have the manpower to take down any big trees that are kind of getting old, and do that sort of maintenance. And so this is how we think that Phytophthora ramorum was originally introduced onto these species, is that the contractors who were coming in maybe had it on their chainsaws or on their boots or something of that matter. So basically what happened is the entire woodlot got infected, and they had to pull all of the trees down, and now they have some rhododendron that were grown near the woodlot are now infected, and now it's a big issue for them. And so I said to Ed, I was like, if you, again, like, what lessons can you learn from this? And he said, you know, I do think about plant pest and security, I do think about biosecurity and garden hygiene standards, but I never thought to talk to contractors who came into our property, to volunteers who are here all the time, or to even to visitors who are walking through with mud on their boots from other gardens, from mud on their boots from other countries. Never even considered doing that, and it could be a problem. So definitely was something too that he wished he had done differently. And so finally, this is St. Michael's Mount, which is this big castle in Mounts Bay in Penzance, where I lived. It's one of the 3 castles that St. Michael appeared to the fishermen, supposedly. But now it's this really interesting garden that's owned by the National Trust. And so for them, luckily, they don't have any current pest and disease issues, but they are very, very concerned. They are an island. They have this nice protection of the water to keep pests and disease from moving in. But they also have one of the most unique collections in all of England because they are able to take care of, because they were able to manipulate the environment on the island. They can create all these amazing microclimates. They can grow succulents from Mexico and other equatorial regions, which is insane. You can't grow these anywhere else in Cornwall. They don't thrive. They don't thrive like a mile away. You can't grow them. They're just not going to do well. So they have these amazing tiered gardens, and they're very, very concerned about incoming pests and disease. And so one of the things that the head gardener there said he was doing is he had a greenhouse that was not even on the island, that was off the island, that he will put plants into and quarantine them because he's very concerned about even letting it set foot on the island. And their biggest concern too are visitors who are coming in and walking around their gardens, and so they are already limiting. And they're also concerned about the structural integrity of the terraces, but they're already limiting visitors to the garden to a couple days a week so that they can heavily monitor foot traffic and that sort of thing. And so another thing that I made a visit to, which was this amazing place, was the Plant Conservation Center. So this is in Devon. It's as far away from every property in the southwest as they could possibly locate it to protect it from other pests and disease coming in from other properties. And it's this amazing center that they take plants that are of value to the national trust from all over, from the northern Ireland, from Wales, from England, and take plants of value and propagate them up, and then plant them out in different regions, so that if there's a plant of high value or a plant that is going extinct in the wild. There is a species of conifer that was going extinct in the wild in England, so they were trying to make an effort to at least have, they're not going to be able to bring it back, but at least have specimens in collections, in multiple collections, so that it would be preserved in perpetuity. Climate change is also something that they were thinking about, so taking more southern species and moving them up to northern climates in case they might get pushed out of their range. And now, something that they are considering are species that are under threat from pest and disease. So if there's a rhododendron or azaleas or anything of that sort that are under threat from pest and disease, they can now are thinking about creating a program to propagate those out. And this is the most biosecure place in the entirety of the National Trust. The guy that runs it is like a clean, hygienic freak. So before you even walk into the greenhouse, you have to go through a pretty extensive cleaning of your boots, washing of your hands. Then you put on a suit that is going to prevent theoretically prevent anything coming out. He is very diligent about his composting. He makes sure that his compost reads 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 days at least before using it to kill any potential pathogens in the compost. Uses very methodically UV treats all of his water sources that are coming in that he's using to water his plants and things. So a lot of things can be learned from the Plant Conservation Center's protocols, but I think the other big takeaway from this is that as an average person, it's really hard to maintain these high levels, especially when you have visitors coming in and out of your gardens, when you have limited staff, when you have limited time, limited funds. It would be great to all meet this like gold standard of biosecurity, but like, I mean, how feasible is that really? And that was kind of part of what I was thinking about first, though. Kind of to summarize, what were some of the take-home points that I had gotten from my garden visits? The first one being that there's a wide range of experiences and knowledge about how to deal with pests and disease. Any gardeners who had dealt with an infestation knew a lot, and they learned it very quickly. But the people who hadn't yet dealt with a big outbreak had very limited knowledge, or had even misconceptions about what it means to have a pest and disease outbreak and kind of what that means for your garden. So there definitely needs to, and in talking to gardeners, when they go through school and even in trainings after school that are run by the trust or by outside organizations, it's not really a focus that they talk about. It's not really a high priority for them. I mean, they really want to go out there and make these beautiful gardens and plant these, I mean, they all want like those crazy exotic species that you can't grow anywhere else, which are problematic for a number of reasons, but this isn't high on their priority concerns. It's not a particularly interesting topic, and it's kind of scary, so they don't really want to think about it. But it's definitely something that needs to be incorporated more into their training systems. Gardeners have a lot of demands on their time. Like any nonprofit organization, the National Trust is perpetually understaffed. Gardeners are lucky if they even have an assistant, 1 or 2 assistants. Usually it's just a head gardener on their own with a field of volunteers. And it's hard because as part of a large organization that has a number of kind of top-down initiatives, it's hard to find the time to prioritize pests and disease when you're also prioritizing visitor experience, which is something when I was there that was a big priority of the trust as a whole. So kind of making the National Trust making this a priority and something that they value in their gardens is definitely something that needs to happen. And then I think the biggest take-home, and I think everyone kind of already knows this, but once a pest enters the garden, there's very little that gardeners can do to stop its destructive path. It's a little depressing to accept that fact, but it's quite true that once a pest is in your garden, or once it's in your country, it's really hard to stop its train of destruction. So that's kind of what led me to the second part of my fellowship, which was, okay, so we can do things within the National Trust. We can quarantine our plants. We can think more about where we're buying from and things of that nature. But unless something changes at a higher level in terms of trade, regulations, and inspections, there's not a whole lot that people can do to prevent these things from coming in. Because eventually, it almost seems inevitable. Once ash dieback entered the UK, it almost seemed inevitable that every ash was going to die. There's only so much that you can really do to stop its spread. So the second part of my internship, or my fellowship, I worked with officials from DEFRA, which is like the USDA of England, the Forestry Commission, other land trust organizations, and the National Trust. And we met several times and had several trainings with gardeners to kind of discuss what are the higher level issues and blocks to, and why do we have this issue in the first place, and kind of what are the impediments to changing them. So you can kind of boil it down to pest and disease introduction to 2 things: the live plant trade and wood packing pallets that you ship things on. So for the live plant trade, that's what we really focused on because we're working with gardeners and gardens and they're buying plants. So that was like a big concern for them. So the problem with the live plant trade, there's a couple of problems with the live plant trade in the UK. For the first part, there's not a lot, it's an island. There's not a lot of space in the UK. There's not a whole lot that they can grow there because there's just not that much space. So a lot of times, even if your plant that you're buying says it was sourced in the UK, it means the seed came from there, but then they sent the seed to Denmark, and then it grew in Denmark for a few years, and then they sent to Netherlands, and then it reached maturity, and then maybe went to Germany for a little bit, and then it came back to the UK and was sold back to you. So the problem with that is that you're moving through all of these different countries that are on mainland Europe and already have their own issues with pest and disease, and you're really increasing your risk of bringing something and introducing something new to the United Kingdom. So this was a huge issue. This is something that we talked about a lot about gardeners. From a gardener perspective, like really thinking about like asking questions about where did that plant come from? Like, do I really want something from, do I want an ash from Denmark when I know that ash dieback is a huge issue there? These sorts of questions, but also from the federal regulation side is how do we make sure that we know where this plant came from? And so the UK and EU has instituted plant passporting. So a plant has a little passport, and every time every time it changes a country's borders, that gets noted and the amount of time that it's spent in that country, so you can trace back every single plant, every single accession that comes into your country, where it came from and how long it was there. And so this is a huge thing for the UK, and I think it's something that could be very useful for the US. So anytime, if we send plants to the UK or the EU, they have to have a plant passport. They will not allow it to buy. And then another issue that was cited is that, which will be interesting to see how this changes now with Brexit, but when they were part of the EU, and they currently still are technically part of the EU, the UK's inspections at Heathrow, so inspecting any agricultural or plant goods that were coming in, were highly focused on agricultural crops that were important to the EU as a whole. So one DEFRA person that I was talking to lamented that when he was, his time that he spent as an agriculture inspector, he spent 80% of his time looking at citrus crop, which was a huge waste, he felt, of his time, because citrus is a huge crop for Spain. It's very economically important to them, but there's no way that a orange tree is going to thrive in the UK anywhere, and any pest outbreak happen on oranges, because it's going to go to the greenhouse and that's where it's going to stay, and it's probably going to be contained within that area. But because it's a EU mandated kind of EU-wide regulations, they were kind of suffering from those sorts of things. So while Brexit may be problematic on a number of different scales, it could actually be beneficial in reprioritizing what is and is not important in agricultural inspections to the EU. So then the other big issue, which is I think more of an issue in the United States and something that I think about a lot as a forest ecologist, is wood packing pellets. So anything that, there's millions and millions of wood packing pellets that are coming in and out of this country every single day. They are inspected, but even if 1 or 2 pallets is missed and you get some sort of wood-boring insect in on those pallets, it's kind of, and they land in the right place, then you're done. So there's an infection. Dutch elm disease is believed to be brought into the UK on packing pellets. Same thing with emerald ash borer in the United States. They think that it came in on forward into wood packing pellets and came to the United States, and that's kind of how it made its way here. Again, they're inspected at random, but if you miss one, it's not good. So a solution to packing pellets is heat treating these. It seems pretty obvious, but it's not required. It's not a thing yet. But definitely heat treating pellets or switching over to recycled plastic pellets would be a huge benefit to, or would go a long way to stopping the incoming of pest and disease on packing pellets. And the problem is that officials in UK government agencies do recognize that these are issues and that there are some logical fixes to it, but they're in conflict with other agencies that are afraid of impeding free trade and the flow of free trade and those sorts of things. So there's definitely a recognition at some level that these are issues and that people are interested in working on them, but there's also the contrasting issue of other people being afraid that this is going to impede or hurt free trade. So at the end of my fellowship, I had kind of assembled a bunch of materials, and I'm just going to flip through these really quickly because no one really wants to look at these in detail, but what I found is that gardeners are out in their garden a lot. They don't want to sit in front of their computer, so I tried to create one-page documents that they can take with them out in the field or hang on their garden wall that visitors can, or volunteers can easily read, that gardeners can really easily read, and contractors really easily read. And that kind of cuts through the bureaucratic red tape. I think we have an issue with bureaucracy. Sometimes when you're trying to do anything in the U.S., it's hard to, figure out what the right steps are and who the right people to call. It's like 10,000 times worse in the UK. So trying to make an easy flow chart of like, if you find a pest and disease in your garden and you don't know what it is, kind of these are the steps that you take. And then, so this is kind of along the same lines. And then fitting into their, going back to the idea of the National Trust making this a priority. Writing guidelines that fit with, so this is formatted exactly how their other guidelines are formatted, so they have guidelines on visitor experience and garden presentation and things like that, and so having biosecurity standards that fits in with the other boxes that you need to check as a gardener, I think is a really important thing to do, and it also gives them kind of cues as to what you should be thinking about and what sorts of steps that you can do to kind of improve your gardens. And if anyone has questions on these, I can come back later. But so kind of what are the take-home messages that we can bring with us back to the US? We have dozens of pests and disease. We have emerald ash borer, hemlock lily delgia, which is currently killing all the hemlocks in New England. Harvard forest hemlock forest has been decimated, has been completely infested in this now and short decline. Gypsy moth, Dutch elm disease has already knocked out a lot of elms. We still have it. We still have chestnut blades, so if you ever see those little chestnuts growing in the forest and then they die and then they come back and they die, it's pretty tough. So how do we prevent these future pest and diseases coming in, and what do we do once they're here? So plant passporting, I think, was a great idea of kind of tracking the history of that plant and where it's coming from. quarantining plant shipments upon arrival. So even as we as individuals, if we're buying plants from a nursery or anywhere, definitely let it sit for a little bit before planting it on your garden and see if it shows signs of disease. I mean, it sometimes takes up to 6 weeks to show, if a plant has Phytophthora or Ramorum on it, sometimes it takes 6 weeks before it shows signs of leaf wilt or anything like that. So it definitely, it takes patience and it's a little frustrating, but it's definitely worth it if it's going to prevent your garden from being decimated. Packing pallet improvements, I think that's a pretty standard thing. Don't move plant material between places like firewood, because they're known to, because things can burrow in there and it can cause an outbreak. Even if, this was great, we were at RHS Wesley, kind of talking to gardeners there about their concerns with pests and disease, and they had this great example of this woman who, so they used to have this consultancy office that people can come and they can ask questions. And this woman came in with a branch and she was like, I don't know what's up with my chestnut, and it had the blight on it. And they were like, get that out of the garden. So now their consultancy is located on the edge of the property and you can't walk through the garden with it. But kind of having comments like that, don't move, if you're concerned that there's a pest or disease on your plant, take a picture of it, don't carry it with you. Quarantine plants before planting them out. And then if you do get something, immediately remove it. It sucks, but it'll be worth it in the long term. And then consider planting resistant species or resistant strains of species. So, some elms are actually resistant to Dutch elms. You can hybridize species, so they're working on hybridizing chestnuts in Virginia right now to see if they can kind of reinvigorate chestnuts across the New England. So if you're planting on your property or considering planting in a garden or something along those lines. So yeah, basically that's kind of the take-home messages. If you're interested in more of how this applies to the United States, the Science Policy Exchange of New England has done this amazing research, and it came out very recently with the Carey Institute, which is in New York. And they have this Tree Smart Trade program, but if you go to their website, you can kind of continues the story that I just told you of what are they now doing in the United States, what are the issues, what are the solutions, and kind of how can we press, and then we as citizens, how can we press our congressmen and senators and such to take this seriously, because it is a very serious issue. But with that, I'd like to thank Ian and the Royal Oak Foundation, and happy to take any questions.
A lot of the pests and parasites that you spoke of are in horticultural settings, because that's what you studied.
Yeah.
Do you know if they're also having adverse effects in nearby natural areas like Dartmoor National Park, and how extensive the damage is at this point?
So I did go to Dartmoor, and I think their biggest concern in Dartmoor is box blight, because it not only affects box trees, but it also affects a lot of the heathland plants that are grown in Dartmoor. It's definitely an issue. There's all of the large plantations in England have been infected with Ramorum, and they've been completely decimated. You can, if you Google it, you can see these huge pictures of just dead forest for miles. It's definitely a big issue in there, and then also in the U.S. As a forest ecologist, that's kind of what I'm interested in, and how I got into my research now is that how do trees respond to these pests and disease, and then how do I study sugar storage in trees, so that when they photosynthesize and they don't use it for growth or respiration, and they store it in their woody tissues, what is that used for, and how beneficial is it? So if you store a lot, does that help you in areas that have more pest outbreaks or disturbance outbreaks? So it's definitely a huge issue, and it's really little studied, unfortunately, in the U.S. and UK.
The climate there is dependent on the Gulf Stream. Was there chatter about changes in the Gulf Stream? Is it moving south? Is it slowing down?
No, we did not go that far. No, but that would be, at that point, I guess pests and disease don't even matter. That's a huge issue in and of itself. But no, that wasn't really discussed. Yeah.
Within the National Trust, is there receptiveness to using chemical controls for specimen trees, for localized valuable populations? And because our National Park Service, of course,
Yeah.
is wrestling with that question.
Yeah.
The extent to which you should do this.
I think they have the kind of same moral dilemmas that are going on. So, for example, the trust is peat-free. They don't use any peat, which is a great fertilizer, but it also is taking ancient carbon from peatlands and contributing to climate change. But there's, the peat-free mantra of the trust, and then there's the gardeners who have like secret bags of peat in, their yards. So, on an official level, no, they do not use any of those. They try to encourage integrated pest management and things like that. But there are individuals who have like secret bottles of herbicide and fungicide and will use them liberally. Yeah. So, but it is definitely like an ongoing battle about like, on an official stance, like what do you do and what's appropriate to use. So, yeah, do you have a question?
Okay. I've got 2 or 3 books through the internet that tout a different viewpoint. The title of one of them is The New Wild, or something like that. These are British or European origin books. But it's saying along the lines of plants like Japanese knotweed, purple loosestrife, and such as that. Just accept them. Change happens, and deal with it. But is there much of that controversy? Is that a controversy going on? Rip out the bamboo, rip out the invaders, rip out the new things that are not native?
I definitely think it is a controversy, and I think it, again, is like one of those moral dilemmas of, there's, once it's there, there's really not a whole lot that you can do. I mean, you can fight it as hard as you want. I mean, I worked for the Park Service when I was an undergrad, and I spent my entire summer pulling rusty crayfish and mile a minute from the park, and that will never go away. It grew faster than we could possibly ever pull that stuff. We had huge crews of people out there pulling it, and there's nothing you can do about it once it's there. When it comes to pest and disease, again, once P. remorum is in those gardens, those spores stay in the soil for up to 9 years or more. I mean, you can't plant anything that's going to be a host species, and over 100 species are host species for P. remorum. So, I mean, once it's kind of there, there's not a whole lot you can do, and you kind of just have to work around it. There's not, but people don't like giving up that easily. And I think, again, the focus should really be on how do we prevent it from coming in the first place, because that's really the best you can do to stop anything like this from happening, and that's when you really have to put pressure on the higher levels. But, yeah.
On that subject, how well do you think they're doing compared to the U.S. in terms of listing species that should be brought into the country because they may contain a pest organism, or and maybe also on the invasive species introduction, the things that you want to go there?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I was over there, they're like, "You're from the United States. They're like the gold standard of keeping pest and disease out." According to them, like compared to the U.S. compared to the U.K., we were like the immigration banners of pest and disease. Yeah, that reference, but it does vary from state to state. Like if you fly to Hawaii, they are very strict about agricultural imports and exports. Like you can't even bring an apple. New Zealand is the same way. Like if you go to New Zealand, like they will have dogs sniff. Like I had a dog sniff an apple out of my bag in New Zealand when I was 12 once. Like, so I think we are doing a decent job. But again, with agricultural inspections, especially when it comes to wood pallets and packing materials, like you can't have someone inspect everything. And even if you have an inspector for every single piece of material that comes in, stuff is still going to get missed. So yeah, it's hard. Like it's hard to say how we're doing in comparison, and we're still getting this, that hockey stick curve of as trade increases, so do pest and disease. We could definitely do a lot better. But I think in comparison to the UK, I think we're doing a little bit better because we don't have the weird regulations that the EU kind of the EU makes it challenging, and they still haven't quite figured out how to grapple with that, which is kind of what led to the current climate there. But, yeah.
Thank you.